The styling that was in vogue in these periods had certain typical characteristics which we are going to discuss today. Before the cars were there, the kind of vehicles which were in vogue were the horse carriages. And talking of horse carriages, there were two varieties of horse carriages. One was, of course, something like phaeton, which was used for masses, mass transportation kind of a thing for commoners. And the other category were the royal-looking, luxurious kind of horse carriages, which had ornate interior and exterior, and interior with lot of leather, wooden carvings, velvety finish, and embroidery, gold-plated embellishments, and so on. So basically, when the car's styling started, it took off from the horse carriages, and in second half of 18th century, the cars started as something like a horse carriage without a horse. So the initial cars, which we can call it as pre-Gen 1 car, the pre-Gen 1 cars were the horse carriages without a horse. Basically, the emphasis was on trying to somehow, anyhow, accommodate the stuff, the engines and mechanism and transmission and so on. Nobody was particularly bothered about how they looked. They may have looked pretty monstrous, but then so be it, people accepted it. The main idea was to accommodate things so that they are maintainable, accessible, etc. There was just about a rudimentary mudguard, and it looked pretty much like a horse carriage without a horse, with similar looking lights, with similar looking appearance, with similar looking interior and exterior by far. And nobody particularly bothered about how the smoke came out from where the manifolds were running. And so even if they were visible and they looked pretty ghastly, it was okay, it was acceptable. The royal entry started something after 1910, which is the advent of Gen 1 cars. So Gen 1 car, the period is from 1910 to around 1940. Okay. Now the concept of styling started from the royal cars. And the inspiration from the royal cars came from the queen's flowing garments which they used to wear sometimes on coronation times and stuff like that. So free-flowing long gowns, the drag-along kind of dresses, drapery which they used to carry with them. For those kind of garments which were pretty heavy, the lower side, and they were dragging on the floor, on the carpets. So they had to style the car which looked somewhat like a queen and which were safe for those kind of garments. So those two objectives were there. The cars had to be safe for those kind of free-flowing garments, and the car better look like a queen. That was their thought process while styling the car. Now those days, the cars used to sport the spoked wheels, something like bigger version of motorcycle wheels. And they used to sometimes chrome plate those spokes so that they looked attractive. Chrome plating, gold plating, etc. to make them shine out, etc. But then those were pretty risky for those kind of free-flowing garments. So basically the center of styling of Gen 1 car was the curvaceous, fluffy kind of mudguards and the integrated footboards which were rather low, because the cars used to be pretty high, the ground clearance used to be high, roads were bad. But obviously royal ladies cannot climb a lot. So they had to have a footboard which was pretty low, and it was merged along with the mudguard beautifully so that it looked like one of those free-flowing queen's garment. The sheet panels were even chrome-plated or they were painted with high-gloss paint. There was a requirement, a logical requirement of looking beautiful, plus functionality and safety aspect. So they made them very curvaceous, very bewitching looking. Even that cover of the engine was very plain cover. It was using the flat sheet panels. The sheet panels were rather small in size. There were many of them. And they did not try to hide the joints. In fact, they sometimes highlighted those joints by painting those fasteners in a different color or even chrome plating them and highlighting the rivets, etc. It gave a kind of rugged engineering look to the car. The beautification of the car came from the add-on things. The add-on things meaning the horn, the rear view mirror, the mirrors, and the footboards and handles and all those kind of things. Now those were deliberately chrome plated and highlighted so that they looked beautiful, and they added beauty to the otherwise very mundane kind of a car body. In Gen 1 cars, the lighting was add-on and they did not try to merge it with the rest of the car body. All the lights had their independent identity, and they were actually inspired from the lamps that were used in horse carriages, which used to be kerosene lamps and which had to be modular because they had to be removed for maintenance and for filling kerosene. So even as the lamps had become electrical, the design remained the same and the concept looked the same, the kind of mounting, the kind of appearance. It stayed the same, the lantern kind of look or the round lamps with big reflectors, and they chrome plated those lights so that they looked separate. Bumpers, front and rear bumpers were chrome plated. They had their separate identity. They looked separate from the car. In fact, in Gen 1 cars, trunk was sometimes not there, but they used to keep a separate trunk and which was wrapped onto the main body, and they did not hide even the wrapping because it added some degree of glamour. Those kind of separate boxes behind the car, they served the purpose of trunk. When the engine cover came, of course, there came also with it the requirement for ventilation and cooling of the engine. So they took inspiration from gills of the shark. So those engine covers used to have lot of vertical parallel louvers so that the engine could breathe fresh air. Front of the engine, of course, directly sported a radiator. They decorated the top of the radiator with some gold-plated plate or something like that to make it look beautiful. And the logo, the chrome-plated or gold-plated logo, stood like a monument right in the middle of the bonnet. Sometimes it looked like a tree right in the middle of the bonnet. So that was the concept of making it look royal. Of course, aerodynamics was unheard of in those days. The speeds of car were nowhere near requiring those aerodynamic considerations. And the curvaceous panels which were there were the major problem for manufacturing. But given the fact that those royal kind of cars were not manufactured in large numbers, so they could at that time afford to make those panels by handwork totally. So they were not using so much of power presses or dies, stamping dies those days for those kind of panels. They were cut, the outlines were cut on templates, and then they were hand beaten on the mock-up, on the wooden mock-up of the car to give it the shape. And lot of effort went in painting and polishing those so that they shine and they look beautiful. So it was entirely those super luxurious brands that we hear of, antique cars. Those were famous for their good handwork and craftsmanship. So that was their selling point, and that was the reason of their high cost also. The glasses were all flat. The windscreen was absolutely flat. All the glasses were very flat. Probably they did not have the technology to make the curved glass, or probably they did not think of using it for automobiles those times. So all the glasses as a result were very, very flat looking glasses. That was the Gen 1 car. That went on till around 1940. The Gen 2 cars, the focus of styling shifted from the lower part of the car body, that is mudguard and footboard, onto the lighting. The lights became the center of styling. There were elaborate tunnels on front and back of the car just to house the lights at the end of the tunnel. So the highlight of this generation car, second generation, was that lights were always mounted in some tunnels. There were big elaborate tunnels made just to house the light. They had no other function. The front lights remained pretty much round or sometimes square or rectangular, but those tunnels were there. At the end of tunnel, there were lights. Similarly, on the rear side, there were big tunnels, and at the end of tunnel, there were cluster of lights. So there were multiple lights in the same housing, but they had bezels. The lights had bezels. They still did not lose their identity. They still did not merge with the rest of the car. Those tunnels, the shape kept on changing, round, oval, and on the rear side, sometimes they were even fins or fins at some angle, and the lights were sported at the end of those tunnels always. So the highlight of second gen was those tunnels for the light. And in the crossover period, which was from 1940 to 1950 for 10 years, we see some models which had some features of Gen 1, some features of Gen 2, in the sense that they had fluffy kind of a bulgy mudguard, as well as not sometimes full tunnel, but partial tunnel to house the headlights and tail lights sometimes. Okay, so those were the crossover generation car, where some features of Gen 1 were there and some features of Gen 2 were there. So both were incorporated. But slowly, as Gen 2 caught over, the mudguards almost disappeared and they became insignificant, and the entire focus shifted on those tunnels which carried the light. Now, other features in Gen 2 cars, as they evolved, those shape of tunnels kept changing until they became almost rectangular. And once they had become rectangular, they almost started merging with the rest of the car body. So then came the concept of three-box typical sedan, where if you look from the side, it looks like three boxes, rectangular box, followed by a trapezoidal taller box, followed by another rectangular block, as seen from the side. When Gen 2 came, the number of cars which they had to produce, it went up. So the production technology made it necessary for them to be able to assemble the car faster. So for that reason, sheet metal work started with presses and press lines and semi-automation. Okay, because number of cars had increased. Also the interiors, the way they were made, they wanted to assemble it fast, so that embroidered and upholstered interior gave way to Rexine, which could be assembled very easily, Rexine-based seats, modular seats and all. Also, since the road had become better by then, so the car height came down and the car seats became inclined. The Gen 1 cars, the seats were pretty much upright, like horse carriage seats. Now, when it came to Gen 2, the seat inclination increased. It became comfortable to sit. The dashboard started having, of course, Gen 1 cars had very rudimentary instrument cluster on dashboard. In Gen 2, we started having something like cassette player, a music system, and those kind of things started coming in Gen 2. And of course, the turning indicator, braking indicators had got merged in the light cluster. So all those automations came. That was Gen 2 car. Now, while we are talking of sedan cars, I must mention here that all the generation has had variety of cars, variety of shapes also. For example, you had one box, two box and three box car, namely van, full complete box like a bus, a van. You had a hatchback kind of thing which had two boxes only, or a wagon which had a front bonnet and a main car body. And then you had a three box car which had the trunk, which had the bonnet and which had the main body. Initially, the cars came in the topless condition, so there was no roof. They were open cars. Later came the concept of convertibles, where they started having a foldable soft top. And then, of course, came the full body, car body kind of design. And then again, of course, there are more variations in the sense that cars which look like Jeep concept, SUV kind of a concept. So those were further variations within each generation. In 1985 to 2005 is the period for Gen 3 styling car. In Gen 3 car, the main change which came is that the speed of the cars increased, so they became more aerodynamic. The main focus was that the car started looking like a puffed up box. So you take a box, you fill air in it so that all the faces get bulged. That's how the car looked. It became bulgy, it became curvaceous, and there came a concept of A-class surfaces. A-class surfaces means the surfaces which will reflect the light very nicely. And for that, they had to have something which is technically called as second order continuum. They found out that if a surface had to reflect light nicely, it had to have second order continuum, which meant that as you move on the surface in any direction, there will be no abrupt change in coordinate suddenly. There will be no abrupt change in slope. There will be no abrupt change in rate of change of flow. Now, once that is mathematically ensured, one could be rest assured that it will reflect the light very nicely and it will look bewitching. So the car started sporting those A-class surfaces, and it gave a feeling as if one is riding into a bubble, which is reflecting light very nicely and very aerodynamically. Once this had happened, then all the add-ons which were there till Gen 2 had to merge in the main car body styling. So headlights, tail lights had to merge in the same overall surface. They lost their separate identity. There was no need to have chrome-plated bezel to identify the lights. The lights became part and parcel of the overall surface continuum. And the volumes had gone up as much as there were companies who were producing almost a car in 90 seconds. So everything which they did had to be completed in 90 seconds to keep the line running continuously. So because of such reasons, there came a need of snap fitting trims, etc., so that the interior of car could be assembled very fast. Nobody had time to stitch, nobody had time to do upholstery. Those things went out of the window. So quick fix, snap fit, plastics. The car started having plastic look from inside. The speeds have increased, and because of that came the requirement of, and more than requirement, the fancy of adding something like spoiler on the rear side of the car. Now actually spoilers are used for racing cars. To keep the car on ground, once the speed increases, they change their angle so that the car gets pressed down by the wind. Of course, in many street roads, the car cannot speed to that. It is not allowed. But then those, for the show, at least they started giving those kind of stuff in the car, but they started sporting some lights instead of functionality. The dashboard started looking much more sophisticated. They started having high-powered music system with graphic equalizer, stereo systems. All those started coming. That was the Gen 3 car. The car looked very bewitching, curvaceous, beautiful, fast. They were faster produced, and all the manufacturing technologies which can give you high productivity, high efficiency were all there by that time. Now, after 2005 came the Gen 4 period, and it's still going on. In Gen 3, people started having one objection, that the cars looked very plump. They were very rounded, very curvaceous, very feminine. So people said that by macho look nahi aaya. And people wanted muscular, macho look, masculine look. So there came a need of another evolution, that is the Gen 4 car. In Gen 4, people started doing crazy things. Like they had a big smooth surfaces on the sides of the car. Suddenly you break that surface abruptly by having another surface which is intersecting. So cars started having crazy and very sharp feature lines. Now feature lines have been there in Gen 2 and Gen 3 as well, but then those feature lines used to have very big radius. They were very blunted kind of features and not very deep features, they were shallow features. Now in Gen 4, they started having very crazy features which were very sharp. Razor sharp edges, lines, flutes running along the length of the car on both the sides, on the bonnet, on the trunk lid also. how to break a surface so that it looks beautiful and not ghastly, and how those sharp bends can be manufactured defect free so that they will not have caving in or a loose area, or they will not reflect the light badly. Now that became the designer's challenge. How to marry different surfaces so that they look beautiful still. You see the side of the car, suddenly the panel will go inside, come out, go inside, zigzag. It will not be smooth curve, will not be a single curve, will be multiple variations. Okay. Similarly, you look at the trunk lid, it will come out, it will go in, again it will come out. Now these kind of designs made it nearly impossible to produce those panels, because how will you put it in a die so that it will come out? That became the biggest challenge. While in Gen 2 car, the sheet which was used were pretty thick, was around 1 mm to 1.2 mm, sometimes 0.8 mm. But in Gen 3 cars, the sheet size already became something like 0.5, 0.6 mm. And that had to be continued in Gen 4 as well. So that was another challenge. Even the bumpers became an instrument of styling, because many of those crazy features were actually realized in plastic bumpers, as they could not be produced in sheet metal. Okay, so all those crazy intersecting surfaces went into the bumper, and bumper became very much the part of the car, main car body. It no longer remained an add-on. It became one with the car body styling. That was the Gen 4 car. So this was in brief the main features of 4 generations of car styling. Now I would like to talk a little bit about left-hand drive and right-hand drive cars. When the car started, actually, like horse carriage, the driver used to sit right in the middle. But later, when traffic increased, the countries had their own standards of left-hand drive and right-hand drive. While British Commonwealth nations adopted the right-hand drive, the rest of the world went ahead with the left-hand drive version of the car. Now, the main difference between left-hand drive and right-hand drive car, and there is often a debate which one is better. Now, if you see which hand is stronger for majority of the drivers, mostly we are all right-handed. Now, what does the right hand do? And what should the right hand do? In right-hand drive, the left hand is used for shifting the gears, which has to be done pretty frequently, and for applying emergency brake. And what does the right hand do? The right hand is reserved only for showing the hand signals and for holding the cigarette for smokers. And of course, earlier days, drivers had to press that rubber kind of a horn. So the right hand was reserved for that. So that may have been the reason why the British Commonwealth adopted that kind of system where showing signal was considered more important than, of course, doing other things related to the driving. There were some companies, multinationals, who made mainly the left-hand drive cars, but sometimes when they had to make the right-hand drive car for India, they did not make many changes in the design. So it was not uncommon to see the car where the wiper, the sweep of the wiper is actually meant more for the co-driver than for the driver, because they did not reverse the sweep direction while they make the car from left-hand drive to right-hand drive. Also, the handbrake remained on wrong side of the tunnel. Now in generation 2, there used to be a big tunnel on the floor, which housed the propeller shaft and some other transmission elements and the gear shifter. Now, the brake used to be on the opposite side of that tunnel for the driver. These were some of the problems which people started with. Of course, nowadays, there is no need to show the hand signal out. There are light signals and cars are AC. So anyway, one cannot stick out the hand. Which drive is more suitable or more logical, that I leave to your imagination. And in the end, there is only one request. If based on your experience, what cars you have driven or seen, if you would like to comment on any of the Gen 1, Gen 2 cars in particular that you have been driving or you have seen, you can write to us in comments. Gen 3, Gen 4 cars, of course, are seen on the road routinely. But nevertheless, you can write your experience about that as well. Nice then. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.